My manager banned me from asking questions during my shift and told me to follow every instruction exactly as written no matter what. 3 days later his own department lost $400,000 because I did precisely that. He stood in the middle of the warehouse floor screaming that I had ruined everything, and all I said was I was just following the policy you signed. I worked as a lead inventory coordinator at a mid-sized distribution company outside Columbus, Ohio. My manager was a man named Russell Voss, the kind of boss who loved the sound of his own voice more than he loved actual results. Russell had been promoted 6 months earlier and immediately started treating every employee like an inconvenience standing between him and a bonus. He micromanaged everything, he humiliated people in meetings, and he had one favorite phrase that he repeated constantly. Just follow the process exactly, no exceptions, no shortcuts, no thinking for yourself. The problem started when corporate rolled out a new inventory verification system. It was clunky, slow, and full of gaps, but Russell loved it because it made him look modern in front of his own bosses. He called a mandatory meeting and told the entire team that from now on, every single item leaving the warehouse had to be manually verified against the new system before it could ship, no matter how long it took, no matter what the old system said, and no matter what common sense told us. I raised my hand and asked what happens if the new system conflicts with what we can see with our own eyes, since everyone already knew the software had bugs. Russell smiled, the kind of smile that bosses give when they think they are being clever. He said, and I remember this word for word, if the system says it, you follow the system. That is the whole point of having a system. Stop trying to use your own judgment. That is exactly the kind of thinking that gets people in trouble here. I asked him to confirm that in writing because I had learned the hard way that verbal promises meant nothing once something went wrong. Russell rolled his eyes in front of everyone, but he sent an email that afternoon repeating the exact same instruction. Every outgoing shipment must be verified against the new inventory system before release, regardless of any discrepancy with physical counts or previous records. No exceptions will be tolerated. I saved that email immediately. Something in my gut told me I would need it. For the first 2 days, nothing seemed unusual. The system was slow and annoying, but it mostly worked, and the whole team just grumbled through it the way people grumble through any new corporate rollout. Russell walked around those first 2 days like a proud little king, telling anyone who would listen that productivity would skyrocket once everyone adjusted to doing things the right way, his way. He even sent a company-wide email praising his own leadership for modernizing the warehouse, copying his regional director so the credit would land exactly where he wanted it. I remember thinking that pride like that never lasts long in a place where the software still had obvious bugs nobody had bothered to fix. Then on Wednesday morning, the new system started glitching badly. It began flagging items that were sitting right there on the shelves as missing, and it kept showing quantities that made absolutely no sense. Normally an experienced coordinator would just override it and trust their eyes, the same way we always had. But Russell had made it very clear, in writing, that we were never allowed to use judgment anymore. So I did not override anything. I followed the system exactly the way I was told. Every shipment that the software flagged, I held. Every order that showed a mismatch, I froze until it could be manually reviewed through the proper channel, which Russell himself had insisted on. By lunchtime, half the outgoing trucks were sitting empty in the loading bay because I refused to release a single item that conflicted with what the new system reported. Russell came storming out of his office within the hour. "Why is nothing shipping?" he demanded. I told him calmly that I was following the exact process he required, verifying everything through the new system before release, no exceptions. He said that obviously did not mean stopping everything, obviously I was supposed to use common sense. I reminded him, just as calmly, that his email specifically said no exceptions would be tolerated and that using judgment was exactly what got people in trouble. I even pulled the email up on my screen and read it back to him out loud in front of 2 other coordinators who had gathered to watch. His face went pale. He told me to just fix it and get the trucks moving immediately. I told him I would be happy to override the system the moment he gave me that instruction in writing, since verbal instructions clearly were not enough according to his own policy. He refused. He knew that putting it in writing would create a paper trail showing he had reversed himself in less than 3 hours, and it would also prove that his original rule was reckless from the very beginning. So the trucks sat there all day. By 4 in the afternoon, corporate started calling because major client shipments were delayed. Russell tried explaining that there was a technical issue with inventory, hoping it would sound like a system malfunction rather than a management failure. But someone from corporate asked a simple question: was anyone told to override the discrepancies and continue shipping? Russell hesitated, and in that hesitation, I quietly forwarded his own email to the regional operations director, the one that said no exceptions would be tolerated and that using judgment was the exact behavior that got employees in trouble. That single email changed everything. The regional director immediately understood that Russell had personally forced every coordinator into a position where following his direct orders meant the warehouse could not function. Within an hour, an emergency call was scheduled with senior leadership. Russell tried to backtrack, claiming he never meant it that literally, but the email was sitting right there in black and white, time-stamped, impossible to argue with. He had told an entire team, in writing, to disregard their own experience and trust a broken system no matter what. The financial damage was already done. 4 major shipments missed their delivery windows that day, triggering penalty clauses with 2 of the company's biggest clients. The total loss came out to just over $400,000 once penalties, expedited freight charges, and client compensation were added up. And every bit of it traced directly back to one instruction Russell had put in writing himself. HR launched a formal review the very next morning. I was called in first, and I brought everything with me: the original email, the time-stamped shipment holds, and notes showing exactly when Russell had verbally told me to override the system without confirming it in writing. I explained calmly that I had followed his exact instructions and had even asked him twice to clarify or reverse them once problems began, which he refused to do. The HR director asked me directly why I did not just use common sense and override the flags myself. I told her that Russell had specifically written that using judgment was the kind of thinking that got employees in trouble, and I had no intention of losing my job over a decision he explicitly forbid me from making. She read the email twice, sat back in her chair, and said one sentence I will never forget. "This is a management failure, plain and simple, not an employee failure at all." Russell was placed on immediate leave while the investigation continued. 2 other coordinators came forward independently with similar stories about being forced to follow rigid instructions that ignored obvious problems, and how Russell had dismissed their concerns the same way he dismissed mine. The pattern was impossible to ignore once leadership actually started looking. 3 weeks later, Russell was quietly let go. The official reason listed was failure to follow proper escalation procedures and creating operational risk through unclear directives, but everyone on the floor knew exactly what had really happened. He built a rule so rigid it trapped even himself, and when it collapsed, there was no one left to blame but the man who wrote it. The company brought in a new operations manager named Patricia, who spent her first week actually listening to the coordinators instead of lecturing them. The broken inventory system was replaced within a month, and a new policy was introduced allowing experienced staff to flag and override obvious system errors, with proper documentation, of course. A few months later, I got promoted to senior coordinator, partly because leadership said they valued someone who followed procedure carefully and kept clear records even under pressure. To this day I keep that original email saved in 3 different places, just in case anyone ever asks how one warehouse lost $400,000 in a single afternoon because a manager forgot that the rules he forces on everyone else also apply to him, especially the ones he writes down himself.